House Bill 9, and they hadn't gotten to it by 20 till 3.
Like Marla, in the other room. Somebody else came in?
I think it's all.
Who didn't?
Beverly,
Did you get it?
Yeah,
Oh,
Beverly
okay.
might be up.
Oh, excellent, thank you.
I did. Yeah.
What?
Probably.
No, this Beverly.
She said, I don't, is it what Chris, no, I haven't, we haven't been in the same house all
Simon.
We just touched base because we walked up. So I haven't seen
You do more than that.
we.
I'll go and get started. I'm sorry I'm late. Computer problems, getting things printed. I had suggested to Brenda that we spend a little bit of time talking about the racial justice implications of the upcoming student assignment proposal. We don't have a firm proposal yet. That'll be presented on the 22nd down at the sports facility of Urban League. But my guess is that it hasn't changed much in 2 years because of the pandemic and all the focus on NTI and the American Rescue Plan monies and such. So this will be kind of a brief overview of what that plan is and some of the good things it does, but also, as Margie included in the Thursday newsletter, some of the issues that still remain on it. So the little table that's up on the top of the first page here, that is the 2020 version of the proposal that the student assignment review advisory committee had built. I wanted to go through the 6 key elements here that are the different columns. Anybody, I'll start out with dual resides. Dual resides is providing a choice for 6,000 families in the West End whose children have, for over a decade, been the only significant kids bused for diversity alone. The dual reside will give them the option to go to school in the West End, and schools will have to be built for that. They will find some room to get started on this thing, but they will have to build probably 2 middle schools and maybe another high school in the West End. The purpose of that is because of the injustice of putting kids on buses. They don't have any other school that they can go to. Unfortunately, it's bland. So getting rid of that injustice seems like a good thing, but it has impacts because that was a major influence on diversity at middle schools and high schools out in the East and South End. And so the diversity index, which I know is important to the league, or diversity is, that now has almost 40 schools that are either at or beyond their diversity index targets.
How many?
I think it was 18 and 12. 18 are absolutely out and 12.
18 schools?
Yeah,
Plus 12, so 40.
that's 30.
30?
Yeah, but I think it is 40.
It says what, elementary and high?
Out of the 155,
Yes.
yeah. So
All
basically, you're
levels.
talking a quarter of the schools are at or beyond the limits now. So we're now going to take 6,000 parents in the West End have been given the option to kind of weigh in on that. 4,000 of them want the kids to stay in the West End, so that's 4,000 kids of color who are not going to be helping diversity index elsewhere in the county. So in and of itself, that will smack the district-wide diversity index, the number of schools that are out of bounds. But I think the league would agree that, that's something that needs to stop.
What needs to
Anyway.
stop?
The, busing without choice.
No, we don't agree on that.
Well, all right, that's the
As
conversation.
you know, because we talked about it a million times.
So families
Uh,
in the West End shouldn't be able to choose to stay close to home?
The thing is, that what it does, the way it's set up, is the only people who are bused for desegregation and for diversity are the achieving black kids. Therefore, you are keeping the poor, the underachieving black kids out of these schools, and you are concentrating them all at Shawnee. That's the big problem with the whole thing, and it needs radical changing. It's not fair to say black kids have a choice and white kids don't. White kids can't choose to go to Shawnee. Now people say, oh, they can if they want to. But if you don't build it into the plan and promote it, they're not going to, because they will feel like they're not welcome. But if you promote Shawnee, for instance, as a school that really is for everybody and has a wide program that can serve a lot of people, and then you give the choice to the black kids and the white kids, that's different. But the only kids that have a choice are the black kids, and you know good and well, the only ones that are gonna choose are those that are already there, whose parents are already onto the system and onto the fact.
You're not talking about now, though, because everyone's bussed out of the West End right now.
Right, now is a terrible situation.
Underachieving, and Chris was saying, I think
Now
Chris's
is a
point was,
terrible
that
situation
current plan needs to
because we
change,
have
is that
let-
not what you said?
Yeah, it is
So I think you are in
It is not a
agreement.
busing plan for the achieving black students in the West End. It is for the students who, by reason of behavior record, attendance record, or, what's the third one?
Grades?
Grades, thank you. Cannot get into a magnet. And
They
so-
can't even apply.
Okay,
There's an application
Now,
barrier.
this is a multifaceted thing, and one of the things that is in the plan, and I don't know how far along it's gone, but I know there are people pushing for it, is changing that whole magnet system. So
We're gonna go
instead,
through that.
okay, I figured you'll get to that, he and I are together on that one, so.
Well, I think you were in agreement earlier too, and so I just wanted that
to
clarification.
point out that it is not, we are not agreed that it is a horrible burden on the black kids to be bused. Any more that was a horrible burden on the white kids and the black kids when they were both bused.
For 2 years.
4 years, 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Okay, but the black kids have been bused
And
for
the
how many
elementary-
now?
And the elementary were bused much longer than that. My kids were,
Black,
All right, so
our West
can-
Louisville
Anyway,
students.
Let's go
So-
through this so we
Okay,
can
so
get a
has the floor,
discussion going
yeah.
here
right,
instead of,
just don't misrepresent League of Women Voters.
Well, I
Okay.
think that there are people in the league who do agree with that. And
Well, that's
and
because
so
there's no
you
equal.
can't say the league doesn't.
And
Yeah,
it
there
doesn't
is
mean
one
you
league
can't
position.
have
We'll let it go.
caveats to
We'll let it
your,
go that the league does
like
not
it needs
have
to
a official
change
position.
to this, like you can have caveats to it, like,
Right,
we can find a thing that we agree on, I
yes,
think.
we can't.
All right, so I
Okay.
wanna keep going on this, cause there are 6 of these things, and they do interact. So that, the dual reside gives those 6,000 families a choice of, ultimately, it's not instantaneous, none of this is gonna happen for over a year. But they would have a choice of a home school, a reside school that cannot turn them down in the West End. That will be built, one middle school year and one high school year, a year for 3 or 4 years. That's the only way they can do it, and they have to build the middle school to do that. They're gonna use part of Shawnee. That is the plan as of 2020. We may hear something different, but I kinda doubt it.
Question,
All right, Beverly, short question.
you said they cannot turn them down. Are those just the children who live in that big Shawnee district
In the West End,
in the West End? Well, what about those kids who wanna continue to be bused? Can they be turned
a
down?
third of them are, yes.
Can they be turned down?
Let's let Chris get through it.
Their reside is called a satellite reside. They cannot be turned down in their reside.
Okay,
All
got
right.
it. I wanna make that point.
Yes, it's true. Okay,
What happened to Western Middle School? Is it all magnet now?
It is magnet.
Yes,
There's no
no,
non-magnet?
And so that's an issue too, because the people in the neighborhood can't get into the school.
And it's the engineering magnet?
Or
Fine arts, fine arts.
All right, so the second thing, there are a number of things around magnets. Centralized lottery, that's so that you have a objective arbiter of, and person and group to run the lottery.
This is for magnets?
Yes, this is the first one on here. The centralized lottery, that's a good thing. I think the league would agree. It will allow them to choose by census tract area. There are 3 levels of socioeconomic and racial mixture, and every census tract in the county is identified by that. And so they will have a lottery that says if there are X number of slots open at a school, then they will first pick one from category 1, then they will from the lottery pool, they'll pick one from category 2, and from category 3, and so on and so forth.
So, did you say how many districts?
Districts,
Census districts, whatever you said, the census tract.
census tract, all of them.
How many?
I don't know, it's all of them in the county.
Okay.
So that will build diversity in the magnet schools, and that is the approach of JCPS, is they're gonna use middle and high school magnets as their primary mover of diversity, trying to maintain that. They are also going to end school-initiated exits from magnet schools. Polio has spoken on this a number of times, and he says, if a school is gonna take the child in, they've gotta own that child and provide the resources that child needs. And I'm pretty sure, I see heads nodding around here, that that's gonna be a very, something that the league can wrap around. On the other hand, they're gonna have a program where they're gonna have voluntary diversity targets or goals put into principals' annual review. And that's a concern, I think, because anybody who's had a review knows that you got a dozen things that you're being checked against. And it's hard to imagine how that will help diversity, and that would be the first thing they work for. They are gonna do some new interest-based magnets and replicated magnets. The one that Gay was talking about, there's a strong need and interest in having more performing arts schools. So that's already on the table, that they're gonna do that. And the idea of, if there are popular magnets that folks from the East End are interested in, if they're properly placed, then they're gonna be able to use that and create more diversity in the magnet programs. The other thing works the other way, I believe, is open enrollment for parents to be able to make application to go to these schools. The downside of that is that can also be used as a mechanism for parents who don't want their kids simply to go to school in the West End to initiate a transfer. And heretofore, the Courier reported on this last October that there were something like 1,000 transfers a year that went to schools. Crosby is the best example of it. It's a very good school out in the East End. It is got a lot of kids in it, and yet they still accept new kids. And so, and while there are schools that are empty or not empty, but half empty in the West End. Indeed, when they built or approved the construction of a middle school out beyond the Snyder, at that point, they were trying to find room for middle school students in overcrowded East End middle schools, and there were more empty seats in middle schools in the West End, South End.
I thought you said there wasn't any in the map, the West End. Western is the only one, right? In the West End right now.
There's middle and high and elementary. So
What's the
there's
other middle school? I'm just not aware of
another
it.
middle school in West Louisville.
Uh-huh,
Shawnee has a middle school.
oh, it does.
And that's where they're gonna, they
But there's not
actually have
enough.
space with
There's
the
still
new
not
building to accommodate, another grade, but they can't accommodate an entire, middle school.
And
So they
some-
will have to build one. All right, so I wanna go ahead here,
Missy
and
is another one.
so the questions for this committee then become, you know, if this is a virtue to get rid of, this, busing without other options, this satellite reside program that has been around, what has to be done to make that acceptable on the other side, which is the schools in the West End will be, initially at least, largely students of color and low-income students. And one of the issues, there are a number of issues raised here, I put down here. You need high level of teacher skills and wraparound services like the Du Bois and James academies. And you will be facing a good school, bad school kind of atmosphere that the Courier reported on in terms of inviting in to a school like Shawnee or something like that, if it gets better funding and better resourcing to actually attract white students.
I would like to say that when, I do volunteer work at Coleridge Taylor where my daughter teaches special ed. I heard Beverly's daughter was there. And I talked to the Family Resource Center about, you know, what do you think of this proposal? Because every time I'm down there, there are significant knockdown, drag out, running your face into the asphalt fights with fifth graders who could kill each other. And it's the parents that come in and say, you MF you. The parents, it is so complex. So having the school, you know, there's so many issues other than race that are fueling, and my daughter's nationally certified. She's got, you know, culturally responsive special ed training. But when it's one kid at a time and you can't fix the homelessness and the alcohol and the abuse. And so Beverly and I have both been on the school board. We understand how complex this is. And I remember Frida Merriweather saying, don't go back to all black. She had, but we both probably been to lots of national DSEG conferences so we're watching this. But until the wraparound services, they've got 4 mental health people there, 2 behavior coaches, plus. And there's still one kid, the bloody nose last week, and the hurt back from my daughter, and then me pulling the kids off. This is very complicated.
And it's not just JCPS's
No,
issue,
it's
it's a
national.
community
Well,
issue.
And that's why we're talking here, Beverly.
I'm waiting my turn to present, by the way, so let's not let me run out of time.
And I have
What?
carpool.
I have a presentation too, so I don't want to run out of time.
I have lots of presentations.
Other thoughts
you
about
can
this?
do
I
your
mean,
presentation.
Yeah, it's a complex
Very-
issue.
Yes.
The question is, what is it
Well, we
that
are,
you're
but-
trying to get?
I'm making it up on the spot, so
Oh, okay.
I will try to record it so that I can share it.
Thank you,
Yes,
Gail.
absolutely.
Bye.
Bye, Gail.
Good to meet you, and thank your daughter for her service.
So what are folks' reactions to this, and what is the league's role, or might the league's role be in it?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
How, like, we already had a proposal 2 years ago. Marty did it as part of his State of the Union. It was discussed at length at board meetings. There were no organizations that came out against it. Our organization was the closest that you could even see to being opposed to it, because we just said it didn't go far enough. It's a great start, don't slow it down. What are we waiting for? I know the pandemic was unexpected, but is this that different than what was already proposed?
No, I don't think so. I'd be
Okay.
very surprised if we.
So I don't even know, I think it's great. Community feedback is always great because we learn something new every time we bring in a new perspective. But this feels more like justice delayed is justice denied at this point. And I want to even talk about back in 2008 when the version of the student assignment plan came about. So can we keep that conversation on that topic going? Because I want to talk about the parent comment too, or do we want to stop for questions and discussion?
I think I need to know about parent comments, because I've been hearing, I heard a story on the radio,
And it's not just Louisville, I mean, it's all over. And how did we get to that point? Did we have these same issues pre-pandemic? I don't know, it's a
Yes.
question I'm asking.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember when we didn't. which I
Now
was
they're
just pointing
affecting
out,
white
but that's
people.
okay.
Now people with money and power and privilege are impacted.
Mhm.
Now it's on the news. I can't tell you the number of times I hear the words education and the critical race theory on the news, like every third word. And 2 years ago, we couldn't get a politician to put education in their Trump, what's it called? Trump speech is not the word. What do you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
okay.
Ugh,
Stump.
Stump! I needed to take that other word out of my head. So, yay, we're talking about these issues, but yes, they were exacerbated by some of the things we've swept under the rug for decades. And so I want to talk about some specifics, but I don't want to.
Can we go there?
And I'm really hoping to get reaction about these 6 points, because it's gonna be coming up, and I mean, we are gonna hear about it next week. The question is, what piece of this really does the league speak to? And that's why
The league actually did speak out 2 years ago.
Against it? Against the plan or in favor?
Whatever it was.
Was it in favor or against? Did you
It
have
was
some?
pointing out problems.
Okay, good.
Which list are you said 6?
The 6 columns right here.
The
I
6
want to.
columns here, that was
I-
just to kind of,
I want to talk a little bit more about dual resides, which is the first one, and maybe that'll give people some time to think about what their other thoughts are. My son graduated from Shawnee. We didn't even have a PTA when my son decided to go to Shawnee. We went there because of the magnet program. The magnets do work, but students who live near Shawnee, I'm going to stay on the topic of dual resides. Students who live near Shawnee can't even apply to keep their kids close to home if they don't have a 2.5 grade point average, no behavior and no attendance issues. They can't even
School or
apply.
to
So where are they
School,
sending these?
school, transfer. It's called a transfer.
kids? So where would they send that?
That
kid?
is, I don't carry the map around with me like I used
But
to,
they would
but
be
it's
sent
the
back-
resides. It's
satellite.
West
reside.
Louisville
Satellite
has
resides.
satellite resides only. We live off Hurstbourne and 64. When my son woke up the first day of school, he could choose Eastern High School or to apply to a magnet, and that's what he did. He applied to Shawnee and he got in. But any day of the week, he could have said, you know what, it's not for me, and he could go back to Eastern. West Louisville families are assigned to DOS, PRP, somewhere outside of their neighborhood. But there is a small sliver, so I could be called wrong if I say it, unilaterally. But there is a small sliver that wraps one side of Shawnee that does get to go there. But for the most part, if you live in that Shawnee neighborhood, you are chopped up into 12 blocks, and this group of 4 streets goes to this school, this group of 4 streets goes to that school, and that is their only option. If a parent wants to apply for a transfer, just like my son was able to do, they have to meet those 3 criteria. They can't even apply. And so I have been asking our board for about 4 years now to just remove the application barrier. I've spoken at board meetings and said, ban the box. It's the equivalent of a box. Ban the box. Oh yeah, that's a great idea. And I even said, make it dual resides for everyone. My son should look and see Shawnee. Everybody should get a West Louisville school and their close to home school, just like Shawnee neighborhood would get Shawnee and whatever, DOS, whatever. And they pick and choose which one. Yes, we're going to end up with more segregated schools again, but we already have that. So
So shouldn't they be given or decide on what interests they have?
yes, but Shawnee even has just like a plain core curriculum. You don't
Right.
have to be in their
And then
magnet.
the aeronautics? is that
Yes,
still-
my son was in aviation.
Okay.
And their nursing and some other stuff.
There are several, and it changes. Like that can even be adjusted based on demand. Like once you get an interested, get your site-based decision-making power back. That's another thing we've been advocating for. They've been chipping away at all of that too.
So you're saying that if a kid has less than 2.5, he can't go to Shawnee if he's even lives there, and he has to go to someplace, so you're sending a lower performing student, maybe a problem, for all kinds of issues.
On the bus longer, more chances to get in trouble.
And to someplace that really doesn't want him.
Correct. And then they put him off in a hallway
Uh-huh.
with all the black kids because they're perceived to be
Yeah.
low expectations, soft bigotry of low
If
expectations.
they don't miss the bus and
Right.
can't get there.
And their mother has, flexibility to drop
them
them
there.
off.
But if
Yep.
you're late,
We
you
have
can't
that
come into the-
privilege. East End families could be doing that. But we put all this burden on our families that are already facing the greatest burden. So that, we've been saying flip the script. But we first have to just get rid of the injustices. Like, we know that this is wrong. Remove the application barrier, period. Even before they implement dual resides. And it should be dual resides for everyone, because you never know. A kid might be at Eastern, feel bullied, feel like he didn't fit in, looks at the sheet and says, oh, I have two choices, Shawnee. Well, I should go check Shawnee out. Like, plant that seed. And then if your diversity is still not up there where it needs to be, create more programs, recruit more people that want to come to the next manual out there in West Louisville, because we have a STEM program at Shawnee. It could be the next manual if it was positioned that way. I mean, they're turning people away.
So kids that are bused all over, they're school buses, or
Mhm.
they have to catch them in tow
School
things
bus.
to school? Yeah.
For the most part, they do get TARC passes if their school doesn't have activity buses that run at the right times, but yes. It's usually lower funded schools that have that
Yeah.
problem. Imagine that. Shawnee sits half empty. So we are talking about another thing that's kind of confusing people, because we're making the argument that we need to build more schools, yet
Yes.
our schools aren't full.
But
So
isn't-
what are we doing about that part?
Doesn't Shawnee have a, physical plant problem? I mean, did they?
It's
No, no.
been
They- they
addressed,
It's been addressed.
finally.
And-
Put $40 million in.
Okay, and,
It looks great. But all that really was an investment to get them to where they should have been all along.
Yeah.
So, but they'll use that for another decade. Well, we just put 40 million. No, you made it where, now they can use their third floor.
You mentioned the transfer the criteria for transfer. Is that the same across the board for all schools?
Yes, so like if my son wanted to apply to DOS, maybe I work down by DOS, and he would have to meet those three criteria, but he still resides close to home. So when I say ban the box, I'm not saying ban it for everybody, keep it in place. But those families that face that extra barrier already, and they don't have a choice at home, they should have never had that transfer criteria apply to them in the first place. But that's Jim Crow. That's something somebody thought of that they're like, hey, let's make that happen. Ooh, now suddenly there aren't as many applicants come. Let me tell you about the first day of school at Shawnee. There are easily 200 kids that show up there the first day of school hoping they can get around the system, hoping they can impress an administrator or not find a ride home and got stuck in the cafeteria long enough to where, all right, we found a place for you, because they can't send them home, right? That's how people are going about getting into Shawnee if they live in that neighborhood. And so then there's a whole level of, we like you, we don't like you, your brother was trouble, we don't want you, because, I watched it happen. Because I would be there the first day of school, and they would have to corral these kids whose parents pretended like, or maybe they really did think, because why wouldn't you think that that's your school? It's right across the damn street, So they got dropped off, and then they had to be processed all day. They spent the whole day processing these kids, making schedules for them, and eventually some of them got in. But they would tell me, oh, well, they have to apply, and they're not eligible, this isn't their resides, and we would send them away. Sometimes we would send them home in the middle of the day and make them walk.
so I know, Chris, you wanted to, how people are feeling about that.
Yeah, I mean,
It's-
it's a choice versus diversity thing. Absolutely, and we have been sliding away from diversity, and the league does have positions to say diversity is a good thing.
But so is I'm speaking as a parent, my choice. If my kid has to go to school way over here, I can't get to PTA meetings, misses the bus, I can't get him there. I mean, you already set that kid up for failure. And we've already decided someplace along these studies, it's saying, oh, they're poor people. You don't know who's poor or not. You know what presents. Maybe, you think because they live there, they're poor, and so therefore they're written off. And I'm not speaking to you, but I'm saying the world. Louisville,
Yeah.
Kentucky, and I don't know how do we fight that? I mean, it's not just, it's just the way we're treated.
You keep asking these questions, I want to answer.
No, I want to hear answers or thoughts about it.
Well, they are my thoughts and my answers, and I
Can
really
you keep
do
it to-
know a lot about what I'm talking about, okay? So I think I should be allowed to explain.
Go ahead, go
People
ahead.
keep saying, how did we get there? How did we get to this point? And she used the example of Coleridge Taylor. Until at least 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, Coleridge Taylor was extremely desirable school that lots and lots of people were volunteering, black and white, especially black middle class and professional, and white middle class and professional, to send them to Coleridge Taylor. Before that, there was BIC. When my children were in school, they all went to BIC. There was not this fighting, there was not this, that, the other. BIC worked great, had low-income white kids, low-income black kids, middle-class white kids.
Did it have a
black kids.
cross-section?
Had a cross-section of kids. Would never have heard of that kind of violence. My daughter went to work at BIC. It was so violent, and she'd spent 3 years there as a student, right? So she was thrilled. She's going back to this great school, BIC. And she went to Whitney Young for 2 years. And it was so violent that she finally quit because she was afraid of children were gonna get hurt in her room and she couldn't get any help. Now, that was about 3-4 years ago. What happened? The Highlands kept going to BIC and going to BIC. They didn't stop busing in elementary until the 90s, okay, much farther along. And so we had busing in the elementaries, black and white kids passing each other, going to school, equal numbers passing, and it was very diverse, and the children, black and white, respected the schools. But when you develop a stratified system, that has lower level and higher level and good schools and bad schools, and it's related to socioeconomic income or to race, and now it's really much more socioeconomic now than it used to be. Because, yeah, anybody would let some black children in their school, but it's very much a socioeconomic thing as addition to race. And a lot of middle-class black folks have moved out of the West End, so it's gonna be a poorer area than it even used to be, okay? So what happened was that people no longer respected those schools. And the kids that go there, they know it, they're not stupid. They know they're being looked down upon. They know they're, what's the word?
When they gave them grades, your school isn't failing.
Oh, I know, that really got it
Labeled,
bad.
they labeled.
And they know when they go to a school and it's poor and it's all black, they know, because they know what goes on in the society as a whole, that they're at the bottom of the barrel, and it hurts their pride and their ego as it does. Human beings are like that, and they act out. When my daughter was at BIC having this horrible time, because of course it was in relation to her wonderful time she had at BIC when she was there. There was this little girl who was totally out of it. She could tell she was smart, but she was acting up and she was terrible and she'd disrupt the whole class and all that stuff. So they took her and put her in a room where the class was well behaved. Guess what? She was well behaved, just like the other kids. It is all so much expectations, and when we build in low expectations, which they are doing with Shawnee, you build in low expectations, that's what you're going to get. When only black kids are bused for diversity, which is what we have now, there's also resentment. But people came to realize back when the busing was fair, that it was fair. And there are always gonna be some unreconstructed black and white people, but most people understood it was fair and that they were going back and forth.
Well,
So it's not like an insolvable problem. It is existential problem we created by resegregating our schools.
When you said, it was integrated, kids were going back, when busing first started, there was a problem. And I don't think we have anybody here from that era.
I was here.
Okay.
I was here.
Okay. Did you get bused someplace you didn't wanna be? From what I know from some ladies I've spoken to, black ladies, who said, their buses, stones are thrown at them,
Okay.
and all kinds of things.
Here's a problem with some black folks, and it's very understandable. They don't like being bused to certain parts of town. because the schools aren't even as good as the ones they're coming from. So I told you it's a socioeconomic thing, and to speak in overgeneralities, there were kids being bused from the west end to the far south end, and not only are they meeting a clientele
And they
that
don't
doesn't
belong.
want them there, the school has lower expectations, whereas, one time I was on a forum at the NAACP, and they had a young teenager from Ballard who had been bused all the time, and they got her up there to tell how terrible it was. She says, "Oh, we don't mind the busing, and the school's great, blah, 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 blah," you know? Because they understood that was what made all of your schools more like equal, not equal, but more like equal. And that's the basic problem, the stratification of American society.
Is there any, thank you, I'm sorry I interrupted.
I'm sorry, that's my sermon, I'm done.
Is there any, survey or, and I don't know if you know either,
Yeah.
okay, any survey or general knowledge of the people who would be affected by this have to say?
Well, for the 6,000 families in the West End, they did ask them what they wanted to do, and a third of them wanted to continue at the satellite resides, but 2/3 of them wanted to stay in the West End.
I think
With
that
a
would-
school sight unseen,
But they'll have choice, so all you're doing is adding choice. You're not, there's,
you're adding a local reside. is what
Right.
you're adding.
so is there a reason someone would be opposed to having two choices now instead of one? I guess, is that the question?
If there are two places to choose
Yeah.
from.
Would somebody object and say, no, don't give me another choice? Like, I don't know how that question would be, how you'd ever get a negative to that question, right? Like,
But the point is that 2/3, is that it? 2/3 want to have the new plan. And that to me carries the biggest weight, because I don't live there, I don't.
right, yeah.
I don't have, I mean, I have outside knowledge, and I can hear outside stories, or, you know, stories of even people who've been in there, you know, and so forth, but until I actually go through the process myself of living in West Louisville and, being poor and whatever else goes along with, many of the people there, certainly not all. I don't think I would have any knowledge, any real knowledge. I would have opinions, but not knowledge.
I think
And
it's
so-
noteworthy, I'm sorry, I was
Go
gonna say, I
on.
think it's noteworthy that Sadiqa Reynolds is supporting the school assignment plan, and that's,
Who is,
Urban League leader.
Sadiqa.
seriously?
Sadiqa. I don't know if that's, I just heard it on TV, so I don't know that person, I haven't talked to
If I'm
her.
not
what
mistaken,
I
there were
read
some
by Sadiqa.
there were some caveats to it. She's
Okay.
supporting it, but
There's some
And-
other
and
issues.
it's always gonna have
Does that
caveats.
concern me? I don't, because that
But
speaks
the
a
local
lot.
reside, she is, that's true.
You know, and go ahead, Pat.
No, well, but, you know, Newman Walker was superintendent in Louisville before the merger, and he knew segregation was coming. So he created the Brown School to prove, I think, to show that there are white parents who not only will have their children go to school with blacks, but want their children to go to school with them. So that's just an aside.
Who knew integration was coming?
Yeah, he knew,
Okay.
yeah, what did I say, segregation? Right, you know, that was.
At least
a long time.
Now, then the next stage is, and my children all went to the Brown, except for Allison went to Churchill Park. But, then, when the first plan, you know, and as I said, my kids were at the Brown, but like at Belknap, it was by alphabet. So, the parents could go back and forth, I mean, there were partner schools. So that yes, the blacks had to come to Belknap for 8 years, and the whites only had to go to whatever school was the partner, 2 years. But still, it was working I think, fairly decently. But,
Beverly, hold on, 'cause
I'm
we got
pulling
other
on, I
folks.
just threw my hand in the
But
air and
what-
brought it right back down.
but what no one, I think, understood or predicted was how extensive the white flight was. I mean, that's what caused the problems, was the white flight. So then, to help, supposedly help mitigate that, well, also, there was the thing too, that if you were black and lived in a minority, you were the minority, your kids didn't have to be bused. So the black population in the county, outside the city, went up like from 2% to 8% or something, you know, cause the middle class could move out. So that's why they changed the plan, was because of the white flight, hoping that would help reduce the white flight. And of course it didn't. And so then we come along with the magnet schools, and that was also done to help get more whites to stay in the public school system. So that's my side of the history.
Somebody else have something to say about that before we let Beverly have the floor again?
On that subject,
Yeah, I think, I always have a pie in the sky thing about this, you know. I would like to go to my neighborhood school, and I'm talking wherever I live.
know, everyone
I wanna
would,
do
everyone
that.
would.
So if we make schools equal schools, have good teachers, don't send our worst teachers there, you know, maybe I wanna be with black kids, maybe I wanna stay with black folks. If I sit next to a white person, doesn't make me a better person.
That's right.
it
But
makes your family think it's a higher level school.
Yeah, I'm sure it does, but I'm just saying, I just think your
Some
problems are
families.
intrinsic problems that
Some families.
we're trying to dress up. I'm sorry, Beverly, go ahead, Beverly.
I was directing my comment to Beverly, is that some families may think being with white children is better. But if my child is not being treated fairly
Right.
and as a human being, I don't want my child in it, and I don't have children, but I care about children. I wouldn't want my child in that situation.
Right.
So I would look for a different situation for my child. And so I know, coming from the segregated South, had the opportunity to go to an integrated high school when I was a senior in high school. Why would I want to do that as a senior?
Oh.
Because once I get there, nobody's accepting me.
Yeah.
Nobody is gonna let me participate in extracurricular activities, or you were gonna have a black this and a white that. It wasn't gonna be just one queen or one king.
Yeah.
You gotta have two. And I see the same thing happening now with pretense with the school system. And so I don't think the root problems are being addressed.
That's right.
And unless people are willing to face up to the hard facts and discuss race, this is not gonna be solved. It doesn't matter whether you make neighborhood schools. That was the thing in the segregated South. Everybody go to the school in their neighborhood. When that didn't work, then they gave you freedom of choice. Well, my choice was not to go. So I didn't go. And I think I did, if I had gone there during my senior year, I would have been a mess for the rest of my life, you know, having to deal with that. So we gotta be careful about how we treat the children.
Yeah.
You know, and I know it's adults making these decisions, but you got to take adult side of it and consider the children, because they could be messed up psychologically,
Absolutely.
for the rest of their lives, and I think that is one of the root problems too.
Yeah, when
That
you
they're
say-
not being treated
Right.
fairly, and people are not encouraging them. And not expectations are so low for them that they don't rise. And
When you see it-
I volunteered in an elementary school for 10 years until the pandemic, and then I stopped. But I was so careful with my students that I had that were young black males. Because my thing with them was, I want you to understand that you come from greatness. You may be struggling now, but I'm gonna show you some people who struggle more than you did. But look what they accomplished. But if you don't have that to encourage the children, you know, and it was just sad listening to all of this today, because it took me all the way back, and that's all I want to say. This is, it brings me to tears to think about it.
I can say when we moved here, my kids started school at Easton School, and I went over he wanted to ride the school bus, but I went over to meet the buses when they came. The buses from the West End rolled in, and the teachers rolled their eyes. Oh, God. I mean, I could just feel it. I could hear it. So what do we expect for our poor kids?
I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Are you gonna
Okay.
do a presentation?
I have a few things I'd like to share.
I'd just like to hear what
Oh, sure,
you're
sure.
gonna say before it comes up.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to actually respond to the conversation that we were having too, though. I'll start with that. Pat was talking about white flight and the magnets and how they were intended to keep families in this public school system. But what Manual has become is, if they don't get into Manual, then they go private. So that school is being used inappropriately, really.
Wow.
Well, and yes, it pushes kids who don't excel get pushed to schools like Shawnee. That's why they're getting rid of that particular piece. So we support them getting rid of the push outs. Those are called push outs. Charter schools do the same thing, which is why we're opposed to charter schools. There were 3 thoughts related to that, and maybe they'll come back to me. I'll just go ahead and talk about what I have. I only have 8 copies of this, so if you wouldn't mind passing that around and maybe look over a neighbor's shoulder if we run out.
I can go get some more.
What's that?
I will go make more.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
Pass me one right away.
In 2008, there were some tweaks made to the student assignment plan, and it was based on the diversity goals, which I'm still unclear as to whether or not diversity goals are in place, because I'm having a conversation with with Linda Duncan on my Facebook page right now, where she says we can't get rid of the dual check the box because it would create an imbalance in the diversity. And I find it fascinating that we're not willing to create an imbalance in diversity when it would benefit black children, but we don't have a problem with it when it corrals a whole bunch of black children into these low-performing schools. So I hear lawsuit when I hear that, and I'm just like, I can't believe that we know that we're doing this and we've raised this concern, and yet they just keep turning a blind eye. But this article explains how the new maps were proposed and these goals were set, and every school got an allocation between, it says in the article, between 35 and 45% low socioeconomic, minority, like the census tracts that we were talking about. They set these zip codes based on what would give them the greatest distribution of these students, all being bused out of West Louisville, so that everybody would get, within that range. Oops, except for Shawnee. We can't really figure out how to solve Shawnee's problems. We're going to go ahead and bus all these kids in from the Portland neighborhood, which includes the Highlands, which of course they're all going to go to private school once they learn they're being bused to Shawnee. So it really didn't bring any of the wealthy white kids in. It brought the Portland white kids in. But you know, so our socioeconomics stayed poor, mostly minority, unengaged parents, and I don't blame the parents. I blame society. I heard her say supports weren't there for her daughter. Bing, 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 bing. This is not the parents' faults. It's not the teachers' faults. It's the things we've been saying our schools need that they didn't listen to us. In fact, they're over in Frankfurt right now passing 7 more heinous bills that are the opposite of the things that we say we need. In fact, one of them specifically targets us because we're not complying. So they're actually passing a law to force us to spend our tax dollars on putting police in our schools with weapons in every single hallway when our district is majority non-white. And the majority of parents that I talk to that have non-white children tell me they don't feel safe sending their children to a school with armed police officers. It's traumatizing. They get targeted. They get fed to the pipeline to prison. A behavior that they exhibit may be perceived differently by a teacher that has unconscious bias. And the next thing you know, she's calling the cop in to help her get the kid to take his headphones off. And the next thing you know, he's in jail, when that was a discipline issue that she should have handled. And if they did have to call in somebody, it should not have been a policeman. It should have been the gym coach, you know, or whatever. So our board knows this. Our board has voted and figured out every single way they can to try to prevent putting armed police in our schools. So they are in Frankfurt passing a bill that specifically will force us to do that when every other district in the state could do it if they want to. So it only affects us. It only forces our hand because we don't know what we're doing, right? That's what they think, is we don't know what we're doing when it's our kids and our tax dollars, and we are listening to our community members who tell us they don't feel safe putting their kids in schools with police. So
It's called racial prejudice.
oh, it's I mean, look what slipped out of their mouths just in the last 2 weeks. That's why we need to be teaching critical race theory in our schools. So regardless, we have to make reparations to Shawnee because they have had an unfair allocation of students, but that served the Manuals and the Males and the Browns, because when they needed a place to push the kids out, they could push them to Shawnee. So we have to make sure that we're acknowledging all of these things that we've allowed to just be like, oh, turn the other cheek. And then this is what I'd like to share too, yes.
And you mentioned, and I'm not from Louisville, so you're not mentioning Central High. Is this the same issue there?
Central was our first black magnet, and they faced diversity challenges because they had so many black people that white people couldn't get in. And there was another Supreme Court case that came along by a white person who wanted his kid to go there. And of course, as soon as he won his Supreme Court case, they moved to California. And I think it was Teddy Gordon looking for another opportunity to go to the Supreme Court because, man, that's a high.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to challenge it, fix it. But he fixed it for privileged white people, and that's not the intent of why we do the things that we do. So, you know, anyway, I have one other thing. I only have 2 copies of this, so I'll pass it around after I explain it. So as I mentioned, we started the PTA at Shawnee. There was no PTA. And the reason we started PTA was because when you look at the data books, it shows that we have the lowest income, the highest minority population, like all the things that we want to address. And there were scholarships that we said our kids, it was needs-based, our kids should be applying and receiving these scholarships. Well, you can't because you don't have an active PTA. So right there, not even having an active PTA disqualifies you from stuff. So we missed that year. So I'm like, how hard can it be to start a PTA? And all I thought I was doing was, you know, the paperwork part of it. And it was hard to get 10 people to just do the paperwork, for much less show up and do the fundraisers and whatever. But nonetheless, we pulled it off. And I started, you know, you had to have a $400 insurance policy. Well, that meant that the people who showed up to the meetings also had to come up with the cash. Well, how's that fair? And how is that? Why is manual PTA's insurance $400 and Shawnee PTA's insurance is $400? Why isn't it prorated or something? Like, these are all barriers that we started to understand, which is why you need these magnet programs to attract families that have the income, attract families that have the flexibility in their schedules, that are going to show up and do the bake sales and show up and make the teachers feel appreciated and communicate to the principal or to the site-based decision-making council when, 3 times in a row they've canceled our bus out at the district level. Why is our school the one that has to have the bus get just somebody to be that squeaky wheel, which, boy, I got good at being a squeaky wheel, I'll tell you. But we started running into people in other schools that were having some similar, there started to be these patterns. And so I did an open records request because I wanted to just see what is the financial ability, fundraising ability, what do they spend their money on, et cetera, at the PTA level. Because PTAs also run the elections that decide who serves on site-based decision-making council. So that's another inequity because it's parents that have the privilege, that have the means, that can be at these meetings, who are buddy-buddy with the principal sometimes, mostly white people, who get in these positions to make these decisions. And so then the school is still culturally imbalanced. So, I started just wanting to know, what does that look like? And so I did an open records request for the financial records. PTA sued the district to stop them from giving me the data. I had to go to court to get the data. But, and I don't know what they're afraid of. Like, they should be the first ones to say, yes, our struggling schools need community support. Our struggling schools, let's shine a light on the schools with all these red boxes. But I don't know. I have my theories that, the Koch brothers got here before I did, and they're entrenched people that aren't really on our team. That's all I can take away from that. And you know what? It's starting to kind of all turn out to be true. And anyway, so I took the data books and I put the PTA cash available was a field from the forms that I finally did get once I won my court case. And then year over year, and then I compared it to grades, to race, to free and reduced lunch, to K-Prep scores, to the number of stars that the schools got. And I gave them all a color code. So obviously the best number was the darkest green. Then green but not as green, like that was the 20 percentile. I went through and broke them into 5 quadrants. Or it's not quads because that's 4. Whatever. Quintiles, thank you. I knew there was a word for that. So I broke them into quintiles and color coded them. So no matter what you sort by, all the greens always come together for the most part, and all the reds always come together for the most part, because student assignment drives all of this stuff. And our district has the ability to do a better job equitably assigning students to schools so that everybody, it's just like a horse race, like everybody should have the same fair shot at having, and there are going to be some upset parents. And you know what? If they want to pull their kids out of JCPS and they can, great, more resources for the kids that really don't have any options and that really need it. Well, we're the voters and the taxpayers, and they're rewriting all these bills as we speak, so that doesn't have to stay the way it is either, does it? I mean, that's why we had CARA, we had a whole reform. Kentucky led education reform 30 plus years ago, and it's time for us to do it again. And what they're breaking everything right now. They're going to pass the bill that's going to put the final nail in the coffin on site-based decision-making councils, SB1. We got to stop that bill from coming out of House Education Committee, which is what these cards are. So I'll go ahead and pass these around. And we already passed one Tuesday. There were only 3 Tuesdays left where these bills could come out of this committee. And so we were there Tuesday. I spoke in favor of the 15-minute breakfast. But I asked the question, why are teachers having to come to Frankfort and ask permission to feed their children breakfast, ask permission for 15 minutes to feed breakfast? Like, what have we done to education to the point where we have disrespected them, where they have to wait, and they had to wait a whole year because the bill didn't pass last year? Like, what are these kids doing for a year without breakfast? And and so we started out talking about, of course, we're in favor of this bill, but why are we having to have this conversation? And by the way, why aren't you asking us what we need instead, such as we don't want police in our schools, the same police that killed Breonna Taylor and exploited our kids in the Explorer program. I said that out loud, and they got all squirmy. But we don't until there's accountability. Like, these police haven't even been arrested or charged, or no laws have really been exposed that were like, what have we changed? What, who's being held accountable? How have we demonstrated that it's not going to happen again? And why would we want that in our hallways, right? And then the anti-CRT bill, Senate Bill 138, is another bill that has to come out of that committee. So if we get to Frankfurt the next 2 Tuesdays and we make them look us in the eye if they're going to pass these bills, they're less likely to pull them out of committee. We've showed up in Frankfurt. We've stopped these things before. We stopped charter schools. It's coming through again. But where is the leadership on the groups that are supposed to be organizing against it? All it leaves me to believe is that they're part of what's going on behind the scenes. So I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions about any of that, because that was a lot.
You need a bottle of water.
I do. I was trying to get it all in before people had to leave, because I know.
And we do have one other thing. Pat
Yes.
wanted to talk to us about something. Does anybody else have?
I just want to say that I've got the report, it's for members only.
Oh, thank you.
I want to tell you about this activity book that we're putting together. When the tax increase went through, by the way, we said yes, as long as, and we had earn the people's vote, and we had 4 things that we wanted the district to make commitments to, and this was really driven by the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Oppression, and our education committee, which operates under Coalition for the People's Agenda, because we are a 501c4 and we lobby and we endorse. And so our education committee came out in support of the tax increase, as long as there was an equitable student. Well, we wanted them to REAP the student assignment plan, and the REAP is the process of making sure it is equitable, which, by the way, equity is not the same thing as equality. We want our student, when we say equitable, right now it's not only inequitable, it's discriminatory. It's not even equal. Even making it equal isn't enough. We have to flip the script. We have to put the burden of transportation and schedule flexibility and fundraising and all of those things on the families that have greater means. And we have to provide supports for the families that don't have those same means. We have to make it more equitable. I don't know how else to explain it. I think everybody knows what I mean. So this book, sorry, I got off topic. This book is our activity book that we have come up with to address the anti-CRT legislation, and it has activities in it that you can actually, you can color. It talks about Breonna Taylor, and you can color this picture of her. Here's something about SB1 and how it presents a clear and present danger, because it takes away site-based decision-making council from having the ability to select their curriculum. And even if this bill passes, it doesn't go into effect until July. So we can actually empower our families who have this book to look through their curriculum and spot things that maybe are discriminatory in the opposite way of what they're trying to accomplish. Because we already know that our curriculum presents one race as superior, like all the things that they don't want it to do, we already do. We're already in violation. Think about that.
Life is in violation.
What's that?
I said life is in violation.
Exactly.
And we do need to.
Oh, sorry.
No, we do need in this, and I'll just say my personal feelings is, once we say black, we already say, oh, they're poor. We lump things together, and so you, just like when you say you send kids there to some place where they're really not wanted, the black kids, you've already made them feel bad about themselves. So yes, you get into trouble. So it's like Beverly said, it starts someplace else. We're trying to put Band-Aids on things by putting this school here and saying you can go here. And I don't know how to get to it, but there is a problem here. If you can look at me and you say, oh God, she's poor, she must be in the West End, she must be this, she must be that. How can you look at me and tell what I am? So, we've already lumped people together.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Yep.
That's a real issue, and it's,
And we are trying to relump them.
well,
We've got to find a way to make it unprofitable for the capitalists to continue
You're right.
segregation. Now, I
No more
personally
prisons in
don't buy
schools.
Angel Soft or Great Northern
Right,
toilet paper
That's
because
not enough, is
it's
it?
Georgia Pacific, which is the Coke bill.
well, if we got rid of testing,
Right, yeah, oh, I don't either. No.
and prisons shouldn't be run for
Chick-fil-A, yeah.
Never go
profit,
to
testing shouldn't be for profit, healthcare shouldn't be for profit, education
That's
shouldn't be
another
for
thing,
profit.
there's too much
I do
testing.
have a few
Right.
myths that came up that I'd like to read about before we go.
Okay, and they can be done.
Okay, one of them, really quick, is a business about if every school had good teachers. The teachers are part of a society, they reflect the society, and they reflect the expectations of the society. That's why when we had deseg, we desegregated the teachers as well as the adults and all that kind of thing. You're not gonna get it overnight. It takes a process for people to get to understand that the others are not aliens. We went through that process in this school system until 4484, and I was there, and it wasn't because of white flight that they changed the thing, and that's the first time they changed it. I was very active, and I had a call from a lawyer with the business people who were behind it. It wasn't any parents that were behind it. Well, I mean, it was the rich parents, I guess. But because they wanted their kids to go to certain high schools. They said, well, it's only the high schools we're concerned about, so let us just have the high schools. And I said, no, which of course was the wrong thing to say, because then they went to somebody else who I hate to tell you, but I won't tell you. Did say, okay, we'll stop the busing in the high schools. When they stopped busing in the high schools, there were 300 students volunteering to go from the East End to Central High School that year when they stopped it. 300. Now that's in addition to the ones who already scheduled to go there because their last name started, that was when we were doing alphabet. So you already got white kids down there because they're alphabet. And then 300 more white kids were going volunteering to go to to Central, okay? So that all of this stuff about white kids won't go, Bill, is just wrong. The other thing that came up, and it's happened in the past, is the old school system, after Ingleson and before current, they did surveys of parents. They did a lot of surveys of parents asking them what they thought. All huge percentages wanted diversity in their schools. But what was interesting, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I can tell you approximations. Then they asked them, the parents, if they were willing to have their child bused to a school that was away from their neighborhood in order to have diversity in the school. 80-something% of the black parents said yes, and 55% of the white parents, and you don't even have to have all 55%. Now, these were people who, like me, were having a wonderful opportunity in the 80s and into the 90s with busing, with two-way busing. And then they got on to ways to avoid having to bus white children. And that's where the magnets came from and all this stuff. So they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. But the thing is, it's a gradual process. And during those gradual process, the children were learning. Now, you still have hotbeds, and what would happen, the kind of thing Beverly's talking about, and why there was that feeling against South End schools. I bet if you looked at where that third that agreed they'd still like to be bused are going, bet you anywhere it's East End schools. And probably certain, maybe Fern Creek, maybe whatever, are not among the schools where they're willing to continue to have their kids bused. But that would be a really interesting analysis, see where are they volunteering to go, okay? Because I know black kids don't mind coming to Atherton. Well, and actually, even before busing, the president of the
Black parents used to bring their kids to it.
Maddie Jones used to send her children to the elementary school in my neighborhood. That was long before busing, because you had open enrollment in the Louisville schools, not Jefferson County. But it's based on a lot of expectations of white people that don't turn out to be true. That they won't go, and they will go. And the kids will get along. I taught at Shawnee when it was 40% black and 60% white, and the next year it was 50-50. This was before desegregation. The children had no trouble with each other. They were
Okay, but
fine.
we know the world is a little different now. And,
That's true, but that was, those children, both of them, knew what was expected of them, and it's different. What's caused now in predominantly black schools is the re-emphasis on segregation, the promotion of Jim Crow. That's what it is. So,
Chris, did you get, what were your expectations from
Yeah,
this
what do you
session?
think, what do you
Yeah.
need?
Yeah, what do you need?
This was to open up this topic because it's gonna be voted on in May or June. And I'm hoping that the league and its education committee can be a part of education of the community, the larger Jefferson County community on it. And
In what way?
to look at each of these different elements. For example, the balance between choice and diversity, because the league has positions on that.
I forgot one thing.
And so those and the resourcing part of this, that this whole thing fails if there isn't really good resourcing around the schools resides in the West End as opposed to satellite resides. The last thing, and Diane Porter, who's chair of the board, her thing has been that she doesn't believe it'll be resourced properly. And that's a real legitimate issue, and there is no way to guarantee that, because the school board, you reelect new people, and if, there's gonna be a lot of challenges this year to the school board. If the school board says, yeah, we need to have all these resources for X, Y, and Z school in the West End, and that board make up changes next year, that could go away, and that's why they're concerned about.
That's why the R in Earn the Vote was a resolution in support of Black lives, essentially, but we called it the Black Agenda. Some people weren't comfortable with calling it that, but just for sake of description, that's what we were referring to it. And if they put a resolution in place that's in support of Black lives and in support of equity and support of all these things that are part of this tax increase, if a new school board comes along and violates that resolution, we will know. The media will be talking about it. People will start showing up. So that's why we still think a resolution would be a way to at least kind of put a marker down to you can't guarantee it, you're right. Especially as radical and crazy as what we're seeing come forward, but.
Duncan and Porter, and who are the other two that are up?
Craig and Scholl.
Yes, sure.
There's
Just
one
four.
other thing I forgot.
Four
Yes.
this year.
4
And
out of
then
7.
three, it'll be 3 the next time.
One other point, this is about resources. One of the approaches that the establishment has used to talk black people into agreeing to these things is to promise more resources. More resources. When I taught at Central, I had more, this was pre-DSEG, I had more resources than any chemistry teacher in town, okay? It's not resources, it's the stratification. So they try to buy off the black community with promising resources, and we're gonna have these resources, and NAACP, it's non-negotiable, we have resources. Well, maybe they will, and it isn't going to make any it makes some difference. It is not going to change the stratification of this society that helps by stopping segregating and stratifying.
Which I think goes back to why we need to
And it
teach.
got to the point where black kids go into schools would not have felt like Beverly felt like she would have felt in JCPS, and all the schools. Now, in some schools they might have, but they wouldn't have felt that way at most of them. They certainly wouldn't have at Brown or Ashton, and probably not at. Within each school, you're gonna have some bigots on both sides. But it's not acceptable. And we had gotten so far of bringing people together and avoiding that, and then they just started chipping away at it. And then we give up and say, okay, you won. That's basically it, because if we go to making Shawnee into this, if it's not, I think the NAACP is going out for it to be a citywide magnet, which is the only way to do it, really. And so that would work out. I don't know what you're gonna do about elementaries, but.
Wait, when you say a citywide magnet, for,
Like
what is,
he was describing.
like
The
manual
citywide
and-
magnet where they take from each census area to go to the
Oh,
school.
the lottery, I mean.
Lottery.
the entrance-
So you have a
the entrance
district-wide
lottery.
magnet, you're using the lottery, and you're picking kids from all the different areas to go to this school.
If they want what that school is
Right, yeah,
promoting.
yeah.
Okay. Well, one thing you said that, we shouldn't, you know, it shouldn't happen that way Beverly was talking about. Why would I wanna go there in my senior year? Nobody's gonna like me, nobody's gonna talk to me. It's not always regulated, it's not always a rule. Where I went to school, rural New Jersey, it was, and it was among ourselves, we kinda knew, okay, so they're only gonna let 2 black cheerleaders be on the team. So we get together to decide who we were gonna promote against among ourselves. But that, and not just cheer, I mean, in everything, except sports, of course.
Well,
We
that
take
was
our
a
boys to
phase
that.
along the way that we need to move on from,
Yes.
you know,
I-
and we were moving, but now we're going back.
I have to say, I mean, I think I'm scared to say this now, but that magnets are probably a good thing if
If they're
they,
done like that.
if you lower the entrance barriers to them and people go and,
make it transparent,
yeah.
because people who know people are getting into these magnets, and
Yeah.
we're all like,
Right.
And
Wonder
that's
how
why
that
we're having a centralized lottery and so on and so
Of course
forth.
they would, because the school is graded by the damn scores.
Why, if what you, Beverly, what you're saying, I agree with, is that the society writ large, doesn't get much exposure to people who are, look otherwise to them, white or black. Why would we not focus on elementary schools for diversity?
That is, well, of course we did, I mean, the old one was that
I'm
way.
saying, going
Now-
forward in this program.
You've promised so much, I don't know how, to me, it would be great, I think we had an absolutely excellent defect six system originally. Now, it would be even more equitable, because we have a much higher percentage of children of color than we did before. So instead of it being 1 to 5, it would be 3 to 4, and I think whites are now in a minority.
Yep.
So, the busing will be equal.
Much more.
But it'll probably be pretty equal, basically, if you.
But didn't they make the
Since
rule
it's
when
about
busing
50-50.
started that there would be no majority black schools?
that was that was Brown versus Board, separate is not equal.
No, I don't mean going back that far. I'm talking about in
Well-
Jefferson County.
We had to adapt to Brown versus Board.
Yeah, but the blacks would never be, and I always, you know, just coming from Alabama and hearing that struck a nerve with me. Because that meant automatically,
Always in the minority.
always
Well,
in the
now-
minority.
Now, it would be.
Central
equal.
is probably, but Central is probably the only one, where blacks are in the majority, but can you imagine always being in the minority?
Well,
No, you can't imagine.
no.
but I'm
Yes, I
just
can,
saying.
I've been in the minority. a lot of
There's a
times.
lot of schools that are
Understand we
majority
a
non-white.
minority.
We
We're
got a
a
lot.
Minority district now.
So
There
what
are
now,
more people
Chris?
of color than there are white people.
So what
so-
now?
The problem is that you have schools that are very white and very black.
Right.
But the average now is over 50% students of color.
Okay.
You know,
Now,
But I'm
but
saying
the
when-
manual,
True back then,
When
but
it
it's not true
started,
now.
when it started, it was not like that.
well, so
Absolutely.
we don't follow the diversity guidelines anymore.
But the thing was, if you're ignoring race,
Who are you talking
and
Jason,
it's
about?
random,
So you represent
it should be
JCPS?
100% of
Our
the
community, because we elect our school board.
Okay, but.
And-
when
But you said like we made
majority,
this,
minority.
who did
Oh,
that?
that's a different one, you're right. This is me.
When you say
It's
majority,
pulling from the
minority,
people's agenda.
majority black folks.
I'm the chair.
Are people
I've been
of color.
hosting these meetings for 2 years where we have
And the wage.
been meeting virtually and getting people's
So it's
feedback.
Coalition for the People's
Uh-huh.
Agenda.
But, yeah, but we say the majority is
Global majority.
normal,
Well,
white folks, that's normal. So
No.
therefore, they're majority.
We've got some
but
schools
we
that are
now
97% black right
But
now.
I think what you're talking about.
97% black
is the United
schools.
States and the
We have schools that are 97% black.
You don't
So we
mind.
we don't follow diversity.
But I think it's confusing and it's, what do you call it? When something contradicts itself.
Hypocritical?
Yeah, hypocritical, that's.
Self-contradictory or something.
And we still, as you said.
And the thing is,
Sports Center. this
I-
week. It's this weekend, yeah.
Economics is really a big thing, and what people have been sold on it, and Marty does it, and they've been pushing this, oh, these poor black children that don't have any choice and don't have any choice. There are lots of white, low-income people have no choice. You know?
If they live in West Louisville, but that's the only part of the community that doesn't have, resides close to their home. West Louisville is the only part of the community that doesn't have a local resides.
There are people who live, and Shawnee resides, who live closer to Atherton than they do to Shawnee. The thing is that they don't have Shawnee's not close to home for most of the people that are in that district. It's only close to those who live within a mile.
The families who live there.
Once you get past a mile, you're not close.
So, I chair an organization, the Coalition for the People's Education, Coalition for the People's Education Committee has been meeting virtually on Zoom for the past 2 years, ever since the pandemic hit. And we opened up our meetings for about 6 months where we asked people, what do you think about the student assignment proposal? We got feedback, we had surveys, we put together our own pros and cons with, we have a PowerPoint that we did for a long time. We met with school board members and we made sure they understood where the community stood on these things. And the majority of people who live in West Louisville that we spoke to that didn't have a choice, wanted to at least have a choice, that they should have the same opportunities that I have. But also, regardless of the intention of busing, and maybe it worked for them when they were in school, but now it's not working for their kids because we don't honor the diversity guidelines like we used to. That's why I passed that down. We have 97% black schools. Manual only has 13% black students, but others are 40, 50, 60. How do you explain that? How do you justify that?
Oh, that's negative.
Right. But we enforce the diversity guidelines when it doesn't help black children, but we don't. We pick and choose when to enforce it, and it's always benefiting white people. Funny how that works.
That's the world.
I know, but when we see it, we should do something about it.
And we changed it back.
And so the parents that we have heard from have told us that maybe it used to work, but for whatever reason, it's not working anymore. There's more violence against their children in these schools. They're being sent to prison more rapidly.
Well, that's a national thing.
They're being failed out. And so the current student assignment plan does not work for them. So
I'm not pushing the current student assignment
well,
plan. It's horrible.
I heard, okay. Well, that's what I kind of heard was the difference between the proposal. You would rather, what I thought I heard, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation because I want you to correct me. What I thought I heard was you would rather it stay the way it is than become resegregated, which what I think this proposal has the potential. Yes. This proposal does have the potential to resegregate our community. That's why we were saying it needs to go further. We want to see it flip the script. We want to start having those conversations.
I think that's what I'm saying.
Go further. Okay, good.
How you come down and how you move.
Yes.
I have not had time to really analyze the elementaries and figure out how, we could go back to the original way. We had, actually, white people had less choice than the black people, because my one neighborhood school was, when we started out, it was the choice of go to Vic or go to Belknap. And so, that was a good choice. But there were 4 schools that were paired with Vic. It was extremely fair, because you have to have the same number. So 100 kids came out, they didn't come from the same school, and 100 kids went in. And that's extremely fair, and that worked. I don't know any way you can get a diversity in the elementary schools without that type of sharing, sharing by assigning different blends. But you could go back to the original having the schools in a 5 or 6 thing cluster, 1 black school, 4 or 5 predominantly white schools, except it's not the same now, because now there are a lot more black people. But you could go back to something similar to that, and that would work. One of the things that wasn't clear in the original plan before they started messing with it, what's his name, Joe? Oh, I know, he's a black superintendent in local schools, and he designed this plan. And not only was it racially desegregated, it was socioeconomic.
I remember him, I can't think of his last name though.
Joe, it started with an A or G. Anyway, Joe, anyway, he's the one that devised the plan, and not only was it desegregated racially, it was desegregated by parts of town. So at Vic, we had people coming in from Pleasure Ridge Park,
Yep.
from
Yep.
the south, and from Highlands, and then from the Far East. And we had white kids from Portland, and we had black kids from
Well,
around
and
school.
that's what the.
And the
lottery by
whole
class is
system
gonna
was
be.
set up so that it was not only desegregated racially, but socioeconomically. Now, the downside of that was my daughter made friends with a girl that lived out in Pepper Ridge Park, and I had to take her out there to see her friend, but it was worth it.
Well, that's the equity piece of it, because we can do that, right?
Yeah.
And that's
And
what is gonna happen with
Yeah.
the magnets. The problem is that's not gonna happen with
Okay.
the elementary
So
schools.
we make all of our
and the
elementaries
resides.
and all of our inner city elementaries magnets.
Elementary school magnets.
We only have a couple of them.
How many elementaries do we have now that are not magnets? And
Most of them.
The preponderance. I mean, there are a couple language magnets and there, are the performing Lincoln Performing Arts.
well, see, we used to have the color Twitter was a magnet, but they've eliminated that one.
Brandeis is, it's
And
something.
Brandeis, yeah.
And they were changing minds when they got into college.
It's science, math, whatever.
You need to be on.
Brandeis?
Brandeis Elementary. It's a magnet. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what how does it, yeah.
I mean,
I mean,
I don't
it should
have
be
any-
exposed to everything, you know.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, so I think there's a huge question mark
so that's
around
what we could
if
make
you
them
think
all,
diversity is a good thing.
then we'll make them all magnets.
Well, or you set up a lottery for buses, which is essentially the same thing you had
Yeah.
20 years ago.
I think we have to keep bringing up
50,
the,
40.
the income in other words, there's too much association of black equal poor.
Mhm.
So we've got to
Yeah.
make sure that we keep that separated.
Mhm.
And we should also be talking about the non-English.
Yes, yeah.
That's a whole nother group of people.
Yep.
But at least
Non-English
they are
speaking.
in English language programs.
Well, no, but that's not what I mean. I mean, if we're talking about integration.
And cultural change.
That's why our logo has all of that represented.
I like that. That's wonderful, teach truth.
And we've actually updated it to say all history matters when Black history matters, because even before they decided to start letting schools make Black history optional, we realized that it almost had an all lives matter kind of sound to it and made people feel a certain sort of way. So we wanted to make sure we were real clear what side we were on. But then when they started banning it, it was like, Black history matters, Black history matters. Because they're saying it doesn't. And they can't say Black history matters back to us because they're showing us that they don't believe that. And
Well,
it,
it should just be American history.
Yeah.
Oh, here's
That
your
was-
now.
well, that almost sounds like that. There are groups
That's
out
what
there
you-
saying that right now, and we don't agree with them at all. Like,
Well,
that's the
well,
Moms
that's
of
what-
Liberty
We
and.
should
Whether
have
you
never
teach
gotten
it-
into that.
Whether you teach history or not doesn't change history.
That's right.
Well,
But our understanding of it changes.
And then we repeat it, which is
And
why
our-
we
our
are where we
interpretation
are.
of it
Well, you
changes.
leave a big section of it out.
Right.
And that's why I say American history. I mean, if you
Yeah.
talk about
You
what
gotta-
happened then, talk about what happened to everybody then. What
That's
was going on.
Right, exactly, that's why it's all one
But
history.
there, American defaults to white. Like, we don't
Well,
don't
that's what we
say,
have to
That's
do.
what
I'm not Anglo-American, I'm just American. But African-American tells you what you are, and, you know, like,
And that's
why
what
do we
some
default to
people don't
white?
wanna be
The
referred to
indigenous,
as
don't forget.
It's just.
So if we just say American, we're just gonna assume it's white American.
We stole America from.
But that's why I think we have to be intentional and say Black history. And also, you know,
But
Black,
that divides us even more. And I'm speaking from Black perspective, just like we talk about Native Americans, Asians, Mexicans,
Yeah.
whoever you wanna talk about. And what's happening is pitting Black folks against other groups, when we need to
Right.
be everybody
Needs to
bonding
be
together.
all ethnicities.
Yeah.
And all
So-
migrants,
So
all
that's why I
migrants.
say American history. Yeah, and if you teach American history, you're gonna hit Black history. It's there. We
All-
were
all
there.
the
We were
migrants,
there.
all
I
the
know you don't
migrants.
agree with me,
So-
but,
Okay, we were not migrants.
yeah.
Migrants, you can be forced or you can be voluntary,
Well,
but
we
you're
were,
still migrant.
no, we were not.
See, that's
migrants.
whitewashing history right
Yeah,
there.
cause we never.
Immigrant, you were an immigrant.
It was, their history was violent. They were enslaved.
Hell, I didn't choose it either, I got born here.
We maybe should be thinking about using the term racial and race and ethnicity.
Yeah.
Ethnicities.
Ethnicity, because race is,
Right, because it's, I mean, to broaden.
Broad, it is broader, cause Asians feel left out too, I mean,
Uh-huh.
some of, I saw a
And
documentary.
Asians are so varied, you know, to talk about them as one lump sum is like talking about people of color in one lump sum.
Right.
It's just crazy.
thank you.
Data shows
something else.
that the black experience,
Maybe you already asked
and
me.
I don't want to speak for black
I don't
people,
know.
but the
I don't
data
know.
shows
We'll get together and have coffee.
that black people are still discriminated against more than any other non-white race.
Oh, I'm sure.
So when we say Black Lives Matter,
That is for real.
can I finish? This is really important. This is really important.
Do you know that Joey Rocky Adams?
Let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When we say Black Lives Matter, we're not saying no one else's lives matter. We never said that. We're saying Black Lives Matter too because we tend to stop when we get to Native American. We tend to stop when we get to Latin American. We tend to stop when we get
That's
to Asian
we,
American.
White folks.
Yes.
Okay.
So we Americans, white Americans need to hear this so we stop arguing with it and we say, holy fucking shit. I've been complicit in violent
What we want to do
activities.
is change this society, because pretty soon these so-called white people are gonna be a minority.
Yeah.
We already are.
They better have
We
their
already
justice
are.
work before it
Well, that's
happens.
why we have January, that's why we have
2041.
January.
That's right.
The white males are
That was what
They're
Bear
getting
Bryant had
afraid.
fought.
White folks